In 1866, a cavalry soldier stationed at a lonely fort on the high plains could go days without fresh meat, fresh bread, or a single green vegetable. His dinner was often a cracker so hard he had to soak it overnight or risk cracking a tooth. The army called it bread, he called it worse. But here is the strange part. The men who ate this way crossed 1,000 miles of wilderness, built the forts that opened the west, and turned salt pork and stale crackers into meals they remembered for the rest of their lives. Some of these dishes would turn your stomach today. Others were small miracles of survival. From son-of-a-gun stew to boiled coffee, these are the 30 frontier fort meals cavalry soldiers ate on the edge of the Wild West. Let us begin our countdown with number 30. Number 30. Desiccated vegetables were the Army's first attempt at keeping men healthy on the trail, and the soldiers despised them. Shipped in compressed dried cakes that looked like pressed hay, they were meant to be boiled back into something resembling soup. Carrots, turnips, cabbage, and onion were dried, crushed, and packed so tight a single brick could swell into a kettleful. Soldiers nicknamed them desecrated vegetables and baled hay, and the smell of them simmering drew groans across the parade ground. Yet on a frontier where scurvy could empty a barracks faster than any war party, these gray, papery cakes were medicine in disguise. Men who refused them lost teeth and strength. The cooks who insisted on the foul-smelling pot kept their companies on their feet. Number 29, vinegar pie, was the dessert born from having no fruit at all. When the supply wagons ran late and the dried apples were long gone, a clever company cook could still set something sweet on the table. He whisked vinegar, sugar, flour, and water into a tart custard, poured it into a crust, and baked it until it set into a tangy, lemon-like filling. The sourness fooled the tongue into thinking it tasted citrus that no fort had seen in months. For homesick men dreaming of their mother's kitchens, even a thin slice of vinegar pie was a small ceremony. It cost almost nothing, used ingredients that never spoiled, and proved that even on the barest frontier post, a determined cook could conjure a treat from a near-empty cupboard. Number 28. Hominy filled the gap when flour ran short and the men needed bulk. Dried corn kernels were soaked in a lye solution until the tough hulls slipped away, leaving soft, swollen grains that could be boiled, fried, or simmered into porridge. Cheap, filling, and slow to spoil, hominy traveled well in the supply trains and stretched a meager ration into a meal that sat heavy in the belly. Soldiers ate it plain with a spoonful of grease or fried it crisp in the morning beside their bacon. It carried little flavor of its own, but on a cold prairie dawn, a tin plate of hot hominy meant a man could face the day's drill. It was humble fuel, ordinary and unloved, yet it kept the columns moving. Number 27, rice and molasses, was the closest thing to pudding many troopers would taste for a year. Issued rice, boiled soft in the company kettle, was sweetened with a long, dark pour of Army molasses until it turned into a sticky, warming dish that filled a sweet tooth starved of anything refined. Molasses was one of the few sweeteners that survived the wagon journey without spoiling, and it found its way into nearly everything. Stirred through rice, it became dessert. The men spooned it down greedily, scraping the kettle clean, savoring a rare flavor that was neither salt, nor smoke, nor coffee. For a few minutes around the fire, the harshness of fort life softened into something almost like comfort, sweet enough to remind a man of home. Number 26, cornmeal mush and hoe cakes carried the flavor of the South to the western forts. Many cavalrymen had grown up on corn, and when the Army issued cornmeal, the cooks knew exactly what to do. They stirred the meal into boiling water until it thickened into a steaming mush, eaten hot with grease or molasses. What was left cooled overnight, firmed into a sliceable loaf, then was fried golden in the morning skillet. The simplest version was the hoe cake, a flat round of meal, water, and salt cooked on a hot griddle or even the blade of a shovel held over the coals. Cheap and endlessly adaptable, cornmeal turned up at nearly every meal. Its faint sweetness and crisp fried edge made it one of the few rations the men never tired of. Number 25, dried apple pie was a luxury that depended entirely on the supply officer. When the wagons arrived carrying barrels of dried apples, word spread through the barracks like a holiday rumor. The cook soaked the leathery slices overnight until they plumped soft, then stewed them with sugar and whatever spice the sutler stocked, folding the lot into a rough crust. The smell of baking apples drifting from the company kitchen could draw a crowd. Pie was rare enough to feel like a reward, served after a long march or on a quiet Sunday when the work eased. The dried fruit kept for months in storage, making it one of the few sweets available year-round on the frontier. A single slice could lift a whole company's mood. Number 24, canned oysters were the unexpected indulgence of the Western Fort. Sealed in tins and shipped hundreds of miles inland, cove oysters were sold at the sutler store to any soldier with a few coins burning a hole in his pocket. Stewed in milk if a man could find it, or simply heated in their own briny liquor, they offered a taste of the distant coast in the middle of the prairie. For officers and enlisted men alike, a tin of oysters was a small rebellion against the monotony of salt pork. Christmas and New Year's dinners at the better-stocked posts often centered on an oyster stew, the tinned shellfish elevated into the meal of the season. Few things felt so extravagant or so far from home as oysters on the high plains. Number 23, canned peaches were the sweetest contraband at any sutler's counter. Heavy in their own syrup, sealed against the long journey west, a single tin could turn a dreary evening into a celebration. Soldiers pooled their pay to buy them, splitting the golden slices among messmates and drinking down the sugary juice last, savoring every drop. After months of dried apples and vinegar pie, the soft, perfumed flesh of a real peach was almost overwhelming. Officers served them at dinners to impress visitors, and enlisted men hoarded them for special occasions. The empty tins were prized too, repurposed as cups, candle holders, and storage. In a world of brown and gray rations, the bright sweetness of canned peaches was a flash of color the men never forgot. Number 22, PA soup simmered in the company kettle on the coldest days, thick enough to coat a spoon. Dried split peas traveled and stored beautifully, swelling into a hearty, sticking soup that warmed men to the bone after hours of drill in a biting wind. The Army even experimented with a Prussian invention, a pressed sausage of pea flour and fat that could be sliced into boiling water to make instant soup in the field. A scrap of salt pork or a ham bone, if the cook could spare it, lifted the whole pot into something rich and smoky. Cheap, filling, and forgiving of a careless hand, pea soup was the reliable workhorse of the fort kitchen, ladled out steaming on nights when nothing else would do. Number 21, bean soup was the everyday cousin of every fort dinner, the dish that appeared so often the men stopped noticing it. Navy beans, soaked and simmered for hours with a chunk of salt pork, broke down into a thick, savory broth that stretched a thin ration across a hungry company. The longer it cooked, the better it tasted. And a good cook kept the pot going low all afternoon until the beans turned creamy. Bread crumbled into the bowl and soaked up the last of it. It was nothing fancy, but it was dependable. And on the frontier, dependability counted for more than flavor. Generations of soldiers carried the memory of that smoky, salty bean broth, the taste of an ordinary evening at an outpost on the edge of nowhere. Number 20, baked army beans were the Sunday version, slow cooked into something a man could look forward to. Where bean soup was thin and quick, baked beans demanded time. The cook layered soaked beans with salt pork and a long pour of molasses in a heavy pot, then buried it in the coals or set it low in the oven to bake for the better part of a day. The molasses caramelized at the edges, the pork rendered down through the beans, and the whole mass turned sweet, dark, and tender. The aroma hung over the barracks all afternoon, building anticipation. When the pot finally came out, the men ate until they could eat no more. Few frontier dishes delivered such reliable satisfaction from such cheap and lasting ingredients. Number 19. Jerky and dried beef were the rations a trooper carried in his own saddlebag, the food that kept him alive far from any kitchen. Thin strips of beef, salted hard and dried over a slow fire or in the prairie sun, shrank into tough, leathery sticks that would not spoil for weeks. On patrol or pursuit, when no wagon followed and no fire could be risked, a man gnawed jerky in the saddle and kept riding. It was demanding on the teeth and savage on a thirsty mouth, but it packed long marches with the protein a soldier needed. Borrowed from the methods of plains tribes and frontier hunters, dried meat was survival reduced to its simplest form, a pocketful of endurance that asked nothing but a strong jaw. Number 18. Sauerkraut and pickled vegetables were the Army's quiet weapon against the great killer of the frontier, scurvy. Far from gardens and orchards, soldiers wasted away when their gums bled and their old wounds reopened, and surgeons learned that something in fresh vegetables held the disease at bay. So the supply trains carried barrels of sauerkraut, pickles, and sharp vinegar, sour rations the men ate more from orders than appetite. The tang cut through the heavy monotony of pork and crackers, and the sharp crunch was a strange relief. Wise commanders made certain the pickle barrel was never empty. Behind the sour faces at the mess table was a hard truth of frontier life. The humble pickle did more to keep a company fighting than half the weapons in the armory. Number 17. Prairie chicken and wild game birds filled the pot whenever a soldier with a good eye and a steady aim found time to hunt. The grasslands teemed with grouse, quail, and the fat prairie chicken, and a few birds could transform an evening meal. Plucked, cleaned, and either roasted on a spit or stewed down with whatever vegetables the cook had, wild fowl brought a richness no ration tin could match. The hunt itself was a welcome escape from drill and duty, a chance to ride out and feel something other than discipline. Back at the fire, the smell of roasting game drew men close. A successful hunt meant the company ate like townsfolk for a night, and a lucky shot earned a soldier real gratitude from his messmates. Number 16. Fish from the rivers offered a fresh, clean change for forts lucky enough to sit near water. Where a stream or river ran past the post, soldiers fished in their free hours, pulling catfish, trout, and bass from the current. Fried in pork grease over an open fire, dusted in a little cornmeal, fresh fish was a flavor entirely unlike the salt-heavy rations that defined fort life. The flaky white flesh felt almost decadent after weeks of cured meat. Fishing was relaxation as much as provisioning, a few quiet hours on a riverbank far from the bugle calls. For posts blessed with good water, a fish fry became a small tradition, and the men spoke fondly of those rivers long after they had marched away to drier, harsher ground. Number 15, antelope and venison were the prizes of the serious frontier hunter, fresh red meat in a world of salted brown. The plains and foothills ran thick with pronghorn antelope and deer, and a skilled marksman could bring down enough to feed his entire company. The lean, gamey meat was roasted over coals, stewed slow to tenderize the tougher cuts, or fried in steaks that sizzled and snapped in the pan. After endless rounds of salt pork, the taste of fresh killed game was a revelation, savored down to the last scrap. Officers often organized hunts both for the meat and the sport, and the return of a loaded pack horse meant a feast that night. Fresh venison turned an ordinary fort supper into the kind of meal a man wrote home about. Number 14, buffalo meat was the great frontier feast, the meal that tied the cavalry to the land they patrolled. When the herds were near, a single hunt could fill the larders for days. The hump and tongue were the prized cuts, rich and tender, roasted slowly until the fat ran. The rest was butchered into steaks and roasts or dried into jerky for the trail. Buffalo fed armies, and for many soldiers, it was the best meat they ever ate on the plains, sweeter and richer than beef. The hunt was dangerous and thrilling, a story to tell for years. As the great herds dwindled toward the century's end, those buffalo feasts became memories the old troopers guarded carefully, the taste of a Wild West that was already slipping away beneath them. Number 13, beef on the hoof, was the closest thing to a guarantee of fresh meat the Army could manage. Rather than haul spoiling carcasses across the territory, the columns drove living cattle alongside the supply wagons, slaughtering them at the fort as needed. Fresh beef, when it came, was a genuine event. The cooks roasted it, stewed it, fried it into steaks, and boiled the tougher cuts for hours into a savory broth. Nothing was wasted. The bones went into soup, the fat into the skillet. After a long stretch of nothing but salt pork, the smell of fresh beef roasting over the fire could lift the spirits of an entire post. It was the taste of plenty in a place defined by want, and the men cherished every bite. Number 12, bacon and fried sowbelly were the morning anchor of fort life, the smell that woke the barracks at dawn. Fat, salt-cured pork belly, the cheapest and most plentiful meat the Army shipped, hissed and curled in the company skillet while the coffee boiled beside it. The grease it left behind was treasure in itself, the cooking fat for hardtack, hominy, hoe cakes, and nearly everything else. Soldiers ate the crisp slices with their fingers, sopping the drippings with bread. It was heavy, greasy, and brutally salty, but it carried a man through hours in the saddle. For all the grumbling about its monotony, the sizzle of sowbelly at first light was the sound of the day beginning, a reliable comfort in a life with precious few of them. Number 11, Hellfire Stew, also called lobscouse, was the resourceful cook's answer to a cupboard holding nothing but the basics. Crumbled hardtack, chopped salt pork or bacon, and whatever else the kitchen could spare were thrown together and fried hard in a single pan until the crackers softened into the meat and the fat bound it all together. The result was a hot, salty, sticking mass that filled a hungry belly and used up the very rations no one wanted to eat plain. It had no recipe and no refinement. Every cook made it differently, and every company swore theirs was best. Born of necessity, Hellfire Stew turned the dreariest leftovers into a meal that, after a brutal day's march, tasted far better than its grim ingredients had any right to. Number 10, Skilly-Gally was hardtack's redemption, the trick that made the dreaded Army cracker almost pleasant. A soldier soaked his rock-hard biscuits in water until they swelled and softened, then fried them in bubbling pork grease until the edges crisped golden. What had been a tooth-breaking brick became something tender, savory, and hot, the closest a fort kitchen came to fried bread. Salt and a drizzle of molasses finished it, and a man could almost forget where the crackers had come from. Nearly every soldier learned to make it, swapping methods around the fire. Skilly-Gally proved that ingenuity could rescue even the Army's most hated ration. For thousands of troopers, this simple act of soaking and frying was the difference between dreading a meal and looking forward to one. Number 9, hardtack pudding was the sweet transformation of the same humble cracker, the dish that turned dread into delight. The cook crushed hardtack into crumbs, soaked them soft in water, then mixed in sugar, molasses, dried fruit, if any could be found, and a little grease before baking the whole into a dense, sweet pudding. What had been the most loathed ration on the frontier emerged as a treat the men actually craved. The molasses caramelized, the fruit plumped, and the crumbs bound into something rich and satisfying. It was a small triumph of frontier cooking, proof that with patience and a little imagination, even the worst the Army offered could be made into something worth waiting for. A pan of hardtack pudding could quiet a whole barracks. Number 8, Plum duff was the boiled pudding that crowned a good Sunday, the dessert that felt like an occasion. The cook mixed flour, suet, sugar, and dried fruit into a stiff dough, tied it tight in a cloth, and lowered it into a kettle of boiling water for hours until it swelled into a dense, dark sphere. Turned out steaming and sliced thick, drizzled with molasses or a thin sweet sauce, it filled the table with a warm scent of spice and fruit. Borrowed from old shipboard and home traditions, plum duff carried a whiff of celebration to the most distant post. The men waited for it eagerly, and the cook who made a good one earned real standing in his company. On a cold frontier evening, a slice of duff was pure comfort. Number 7. Apple duff was plum duff's beloved sibling, built around the dried apples that traveled so well in the supply train. The cook soaked the leathery slices soft, folded them through a suet and flour dough sweetened with sugar, then boiled the bundle for hours until it set into a heavy, fragrant pudding. The apples melted into pockets of tart sweetness throughout, and a pour of molasses sauce over the top made it a feast. After weeks of salt and grease, the bright fruit flavor was a small joy the men savored slowly. Apple duff appeared on holidays and quiet Sundays alike, whenever the cook had the time and the apples to spare. For soldiers far from any orchard, it was a steaming reminder of home kitchens and harvests they might not see for years. Number 6. Slumgullion, known simply as slum, was the bottomless army stew that defined daily eating at the fort. Into the great company kettle went whatever the kitchen held: beef or salt pork, potatoes, beans, onions, hardtack to thicken, and water to fill. It simmered for hours, growing richer as the afternoon wore on, and was ladled out hot to whoever held out a plate. No two batches were alike, and the quality depended entirely on the cook's hand and the day's supplies. Thin and gray on a lean week, thick and savory on a good one, slum was the meal a soldier ate more than any other. It was the taste of routine, of survival, of the long, ordinary stretch between the hardships that the history books remember. Number 5. Son of a gun stew, which the men called by a saltier name around the fire, was the legendary dish made the day a fresh calf was slaughtered. Nothing went to waste. The heart, liver, sweetbreads, brains, and the rich marrow gut were all chopped and simmered together for hours into a thick, deeply flavored stew that bordered on a delicacy. It took skill and a strong stomach to prepare, but a cook who could make it well became famous in his company. Borrowed straight from the cowboys who roamed the same range, the stew was a frontier ritual as much as a meal, a celebration of fresh meat in a world of cured rations. Rich, hearty, and impossible to replicate from a supply tin, it was the meal soldiers begged the cook to make. Number 4. Salt pork was the unkillable backbone of frontier rations, the meat that outlasted everything. Packed in barrels of brine, it survived the longest wagon journeys and the hottest summers without spoiling, which made it the Army's most dependable protein by far. The soldiers boiled it, fried it, and chopped it into every stew and bean pot on the post. They also cursed it endlessly, for it was punishingly salty and so fatty that men sometimes had to soak it for hours just to make it bearable. Yet without salt pork, the frontier army could not have fed itself at all. It seasoned the slum, greased the skillet, and filled the belly when nothing fresh could be had. Loathed and indispensable in equal measure, it was the true taste of soldiering in the West. Number 3. The Christmas feast was the one day the fort threw open its larder and pretended for a few hours that scarcity did not exist. Cooks and quartermasters saved and schemed for weeks, hoarding canned oysters, dried fruit, sugar, and any fresh game the hunters could bring in. Long tables were laid with roasted meats, oyster stew, pies, puddings, and whatever luxuries the sutler's store could provide. Men who lived all year on salt pork and crackers sat down to a meal that rivaled any back home, and for one evening, the homesickness lifted. There were toasts, songs, and laughter echoing across the frozen parade ground. The holiday feast was more than a dinner, it was proof that even at the edge of the wilderness, soldiers could still gather and feel, briefly, like family. Number 2, hardtack was the cracker that defined an era, the food every frontier soldier loved to hate. A simple slab of flour, water, and salt, baked rock hard so it would never spoil, it traveled across the entire West and back without crumbling. The men gave it grim nicknames: Tooth Duller, Sheet Iron Cracker, Worm Castle, because of the weevils that sometimes shared it. To eat it, a soldier soaked it soft, fried it in grease, or crumbled it into his coffee and skimmed off whatever floated up. Despite every complaint, hardtack was the steady heartbeat of the ration, the one food a man could always count on when nothing else arrived. It fed the cavalry through marches, sieges, and lonely winters. Hard, plain, and everlasting, it was the unbreakable foundation of frontier survival. And finally, number 1, coffee was the soldier's true comfort, the one ration he prized above all others on the edge of the Wild West. Issued as green, unroasted beans, it was roasted in a skillet over the fire, crushed with a rifle butt or a rock when no grinder could be found, and boiled black and strong in a battered tin pot. The smell of it brewing at dawn could rouse the deadest barracks, and a hot cup at the end of a brutal march felt like salvation. Soldiers drank it scalding, bitter, and constant, sometimes a dozen cups a day, and would trade nearly anything for an extra ration. It warmed the body, steadied the nerves, and tied the whole exhausting day together. More than any meal, coffee was the small daily mercy that made frontier soldiering endurable. Across all 30 entries, from the dreaded desiccated vegetables to the beloved tin cup of coffee, these frontier meals tell a story of endurance and ingenuity and survival on the far edge of the country. Some, like son of a gun stew and the Christmas feast, were small triumphs of abundance. Others, like hardtack and salt pork, were simply the grinding reality of a soldier's daily life. The common thread was making do, stretching every ration, wasting nothing, and turning the plainest supplies into something a man could face the day on. These were the meals that fueled the cavalry as it crossed a continent, and they remain the true taste of the Wild West.